Hey, welcome back. It is officially fall time here in the United States, in this hemisphere, believe it or not, even though it's pretty warm for this time, which it usually is here in the southeastern United States. We don't get a break really until mid-October, but we've had some times where it's kind of slacked off. The rain always saves us. Feels very terrible for those who are in the path of Hurricane Idalia. Yeah, it just doesn't stop. The Gulf has been pretty active the last couple of years, and when that Gulf is incredibly warm, you just forget it. It's just terrible, and there's just so much in that hurricane's path. I don't wish that on anybody. We have had a lot of the remnants of these kind of hurricanes come up here to the ATL Metro. And if it's bad like that when it's a tropical depression over here, or even a kind of a weak tropical storm, which I've experienced many times over the last number of decades here, it is just horrific. So I can't even imagine even a Cat 1 hurricane, much less anything more strong than that hitting. It's just got to be terrifying. And I pray and hope for the best for everybody who's been dealing with that. It's just complete total nightmare. Mother Nature is very unforgiving in a lot of ways. I always get crazy with the lightning around here too. They say it's even more so the weather experts, like the weather experts say, Florida is the lightning capital of the world, and it's pretty strong up here in Georgia too. Where I grew up in Ohio, I saw quite a bit of it, but these days, I don't know, freaks me out. I'm afraid everything here is just going to get zapped, or God forbid something actually like hits and catches fire. It's a nightmare. I've seen that happen around here. Not in progress, but the remnants of something like that. But anyway, enough about the weather and all of my paranoias with lightning. We have a great little conversation on the podcast episode today. I speak with Jock Bartley. Jock started and is still part of this wonderful band called Firefall. They have had some hits, some pretty big hits on the US Top 40. And hey, anybody who could at least get one hit on there has done well, but they're not a one-hit wonder. Firefall had a nice collection of them. And in fact, they had enough for a greatest hits collection. So yeah, they've done very, very well. Firefall has gone through many personnel changes over the years. I don't get too much into that with Jock on that. People exiting in and out, which is normal if you're going to keep something like this going for the better part of 50 years plus. It's going to happen. But he's full of energy. Jock is a incredibly talented musician, musical artist in his own right, straight out of Colorado. I love speaking with people all over the place, and especially Colorado is just precious. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful state. Really enjoy it. Oh, I've got an email here. Let me see what is going on. Doing well, doing well. Okay, that's a wonderful email I got here. If you're hearing that dinging in the back, just so popular, right? Anywho, I'm not going to let that throw me off. Jock is amazing, and we had a great talk. And Firefall has a new release out. It's called Friends and Family, not the thing that MCI did years ago. I think that's for the older cats out there, right? Not so old. Come on, none of us are old. Anyway, Friends and Family is a collection of covers from the bands that had inspired Firefall and some of the bands that they even opened up for back in the day. Firefall opened up for Fleetwood Mac on their very, very well done Rumors tour, and that was the pinnacle of Fleetwood Mac's success. And Mick Fleetwood has gotten to know Jock over the years, even helped him out with some projects and dealing with some managerial things that were happening in Firefall back in the day, which would be the mid to late 1970s. But they cover about 13 songs in this collection on Friends and Family, and it's incredible. I really enjoy it. Lynyrd Skynyrd's Simple Man is covered. Doobie Brothers' Long Train Running kicks it off. It's incredible. Good stuff. Gram Parsons cover, Ooh, Las Vegas. Good stuff. And a track called Colorado by a band called the Flying Burrito Brothers. So good stuff. I really had a good time speaking with Jock about how this project came together and how they are going forward, getting on the road. They don't get on the road like they used to. He doesn't really need to, but we get into all of that. So I really hope you enjoy this. You got a new project out, and tell us all about that. You just released this, and it's 13 covers of some of the greatest bands that inspired you, and you've even opened up for. You got a link to a lot of great people who you've met in your career. It's fascinating.
It is, and for me, it was wonderful. I know how to make good Firefall records after these decades, but this was a challenge, and we had to be very careful and selective of the songs we chose. But the premise, for anybody who doesn't know, is that my manager Lynn in Los Angeles, who's also our record label, called me about a year and a half ago and said, the original members of Firefall they were in a lot of other famous bands. Some of you guys, the Byrds, the Flying Burrito Brothers, Spirit, JoJo Gunn, Dan Fogelberg, in my case, Gram Parsons. And he said, why don't you do an album of their material? And the light bulb went on, and I went, that's great, Lynn. I like that idea, but let's expand it. In 1976, when our first Firefall album was released and hit it real big and went gold faster than any album to that point on Atlantic Records, we toured with pretty much all the top bands in the country. And I said, so we toured with Doobie Brothers, Fleetwood Mac, Leonard Skinner, Marshall Tucker, Hart, the band with Levon Helm and Robbie Robertson. We did the last band tour, which was unbelievable. And I said, let's include a song from some of those bands too. And he went, great. And just to show you about being careful, as soon as he heard, oh, I didn't know you guys toured with the band. That's great. You can do, Up on Cripple Creek. And I went, no friggin' way. I said, that's the song that only Levon Helm should sing. And, there were definitely some songs that were kind of hands off, I thought, as leader of the band and producer of this record. For instance, and this album was a kind of a lot about Mark Andes, the bass player of Firefall, who retired and quit the band like 3 months before we started this record, and we were really, really fortunate to get the lead singer, bass player, John Bisaha, who also plays with the Babies, and he's an incredible singer.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. And Steve Weinmeister, the other lead vocalist, was in the band for like 23 years, and then he quit for 5 years and then rejoined. But for me, having those good of vocals on this album, and yeah, I sing the bottom part. I'm the third singer, and I allowed myself to sing 3 songs. But, it was just so wonderful having those guys singing as great as they do to make this record with. Well, anyway, when it came to the Heart song, somebody suggested, hey, we could do Barracuda. And I went, no. That's one of those songs you can't do. That's a Heart song. And we toured with them and even were managed by their manager for a number of years back in the 70s. And John I said, I don't know what Heart song to play. I mean, the Wilson sisters and Ann Wilson, my gosh, what song do you to pick? And John leaned in and said, I could really sing the heck out of What About Love? And I went, What About Love? Well, okay, bingo, that's the one. And what's interesting is I'm good friends with Howard Leese from Heart. And for the last 10 years, he's been playing with Bad Company and the Paul Rogers Band. Talk about a great singer.
Yeah, oh my God.
And John used to play in a group in Vegas with Howard, the the Legends of Rock or something, and it's all these people from famous bands that did a show in Vegas for a number of years, and John was one of the singers, so he knew Howard real well. I called Howard and I said, "Hey, we're doing this song. Here's the premise, and you played such a great guitar solo on the original Heart version of What About Love. Do you want to play the solo on this song?" And he went,
yeah.
"Oh, that's great. Yeah, I'd love to." And I said, "So," and a lot of this record, Bob, was done, via email, so we had the track going, and John singing this song so great. I emailed it out to Howard and I said, put some power guitars in the chorus and why don't you play the solo? And he said, okay. And then he calls me back the next day and said, "Hey, you guys changed the chords on the solo a little bit." And of course, it put it down in a different key. So, it wasn't up in Ann Wilson's key.
Yeah.
And he said, I can't play the same solo as I played. And I went, "I don't want you to play the same solo. Play whatever you feel like. This is a new version." He went, "Oh, okay. I get the concept." And so he did the solo on that and participated. And, it was great having a lot of guest stars on this record. And, one little side light for you, being a studio guy like you are.
Yes.
So when Howard sent me back his email with the solo on What About Love, I figured, he's been playing in Bad Company. It's like, wow, I figured, it's going to be a great power solo. He sent it back to me, and it was a clean, direct guitar with no distortion, really nice choice of notes. But I'm going, and they printed, for some reason, the engineer in LA printed all the reverb and delay on the track. And I went,
wow.
Well, the notes are great on the solo, but I don't like the sound of this. So I suggested to my engineer in Boulder, I said, so let's make another track of Howard, a second track of Howard, and put an amp simulator on it and make it distorted. And what happened was when you did that, and we got a good sound out of that, the echo was so loud, much louder, that it was not okay. And I went, now what am I going to do? And I thought, okay, I'm going to learn Howard's solo verbatim and play with my smoke and lead guitar sound and not put any effect on it. And let's see what that does. So what people hear on our album of the Heart song, What About Love, on the solo, it's Howard's solo, but there's three of us playing unison and made this big thing about it. And adding my guitar with no echo kind of canceled out some of the too much echo on the other tracks. And it sounds great, and that's what's so fun about making records.
It's magic, total magic. I love hearing that.
I'm a painter. I've been a painter longer than I've been a musician, which is my whole darn life. And when you're in the studio recording a new song, you're starting off with a blank canvas with nothing on it. And everything you add needs to further how good the song is. And there's a point by which you kind of go, okay, that's it. We're done, and it was just so much fun recording these songs by other groups and other artists. And the main thing to me was we had to do everything respectfully. We honored that band, and we honored the 70s, late 60s and 70s, that in the 70s, Firefall was really fortunate to play a small role in. And we did it with love. And I hope it shows through on all these tracks, because as a producer, I kept it pretty sparse. I didn't want to add a lot of things. Hey, let's add strings. Hey, let's add, all this, tons of vocals or, wall-to-wall guitars or anything. But I wanted to kind of keep it pretty sparse so that the songs themselves and the singing and the performances shone through, to everybody listening.
Yeah, covers can get really tricky because you feel like, oh, am I doing karaoke here? Wait a minute, am I? Or you're trying to like reinvent the song, reimagine it. Oh, I don't know. People are not going to like that. Are you reimagining it to being something completely different, and it's not honoring the original artist? It's a tricky thing.
Well, I knew that even when we kept it really close to the original arrangement, like Part of the Plan by Dan Fogelberg,
Yeah,
you know, that our
great song.
version would sound different because it's a different singer, different guitar sounds, different studio capabilities than when Fogelberg, recorded the song back in the early 70s with all the Eagles, by the way, singing
Mm.
on that song, you know. So
Man.
a few of the songs I really wanted to keep like they're supposed to be. And as a lead guitar player, back to the honoring the lead guitar players who played the original solos on this, like on the Dan Fogelberg song. After listening to it, I knew right away that I needed to pretty much play Dan's solo because that's what it needs to be, you know. And what a
Mm.
great solo! So I did, I didn't learn it probably 100% verbatim, but I did, I kept it really close to what it was. Same thing with "I Got a Line on You" by Spirit. Randy California solo is priceless. That's the only solo
Yeah.
that really should be on that song, no matter who does it, you know. But then, so about half the songs we kept right down the pike and thought, okay, we're going to let the song speak for itself. And then there was a song I didn't know what Doobie Brothers song to pick.
Yeah.
And, somebody said, hey, listen to the music. And I went, no, 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 not that one, you know. And,
Yeah. Too
a
obvious.
lot of people, said we should do Long Train Running. And I went, well, okay. Now, my problem with Firefall cutting Long Train Running was that Tommy Johnson #1 guitar part,
You're
is the
right.
whole song. That's it, But a lot of people don't realize that there's another second guitar part on that song that was really important, but it wasn't as featured as the #1 guitar part on their original. And I said, okay, let me feature the Doobie Brothers' second guitar part, and we'll kind of not take out but lessen the impact of Tommy's original, signature
Yeah.
guitar lines. And back to that thing about you just try to make a song and add things to the song that really further the song. And I got to a point and I went, I think we could use some sax on this. So we put Jim Waddell, who's our wonderful sax flute player, on the record and kind of started finishing it up. And I went, well, this is great. It's really different than the original. I didn't even realize that the original had so much harmonica on it. I only listened to the
Yeah.
song one time, weeks before we started recording it. And I had my vision and, go in there and do the guitars and stuff. So that song and a few other songs are kind of different, but of course they're the same song and with the same vocals. And the other thing about the Doobie Brothers song is I kind of figured that thousands of Doobie Brother fans would really be pissed off that how dare they do my favorite song,
Yeah.
which
Yeah. Yeah.
means it better be damn good.
Right, right. It kicks off the album too. That's your opening track, and it really gets you in the groove of all the dozen songs that follow it. It's a great sequencing. Did that take
Well,
a lot of
thanks.
thought when you were putting that together?
The main thought about that I had putting the sequence together was so I've got two great lead vocalists, John Besaha and Steve Weinmeister, and I sang 3 of the songs. So I knew that I couldn't put 3 or 4 John songs together. I had
Exactly.
to break it up a little
Yeah.
bit. And, we start out with John singing the Doobie Brothers song, and then Steven sings Dan Fogelberg, then John sings Heart, then I sing Can't You See by Marshall Tucker. And what was interesting for me too as a lead guitar player, because I'm fortunate as a guitar player in a couple of ways. Um, I've always been a right brain player and not really think about what you're going to play or, hey, what am I going to play next? You just play and you just
Right.
go for it.
Your artistic
And
side.
yeah, and so that, but also, I sound like I sound. I'm pretty, and that's rare because so many guitar players, lead guitar players, particularly back in the 70s and 80s,
Right.
they just play. It's like an ego thing for them to show people how fast they can play. And I had the great fortune to have taken lessons from the time I was 8.5 years old till 14, with a world famous jazz guitar player, Johnny Smith, who used to play with Bing Crosby and
Oh, wow.
and Stan Getz and Doc Severinsen, and he had like 12 or 15 albums out, and here I was, a little kid learning how to play guitar. And two things about that whole thing with Johnny Smith. I don't think he ever really necessarily told me this, but watching him play and listening to his records, I learned from the master that being a soloist and playing tasty solos, improvising solos, whether it be a guitar player, a sax player, or a keyboard player, it's not about what you play that's important. It's kind of what you don't play. And it's the spaces you leave. And it's, and I can play one note and then stop and leave a space, and the tension grows for people listening until I break the tension with another note or another lick or something, and and I learned that early on to that pretty much anything I ever did live in a band or in the studio with Firefall or any of the other studio stuff that I've done is my guitar parts needed to, number one, further the song, make the song better. It's not an ego trip about, hey, listen to my licks. It's like, boom. And one of the things I think that I do really well is answer back vocal passages. Like on So Long a Firefall, Rick will sing something, and without even thinking, I'll play something answering him back, and everything. So I had a really great jazz and classical training. But the end of the Johnny Smith stories was, from February 9th, 1964, and the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, tens of millions of young American kids went, oh,
Yeah.
and
I could do that.
And I didn't, after the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, I didn't want to play jazz anymore. I didn't want to learn any more of this fancy stuff. I wanted to be in a rock band. And the cool thing for me was I'd already played almost 5 years before that. And, so a lot of my friends in 8th grade or whatever year it was, 9th grade, 8th grade, 7th grade, it must have been probably between 8th grade and freshman year for me. A lot of my friends said, wow, I'd love to play the guitar and be in a band. And I already was pretty good in thinking, hey, I can work these songs out right now. So, yay for the Beatles, the best band ever.
Yeah, hopefully there will never be another band that eclipses them. Beatles are
there
the
won't
gold
be.
standard.
There can't be.
You can't. You can't.
There won't be. I mean, first of all of us people in the 70s that made music, learned from the Beatles. You can write your own songs, and make the money, So, and now, of course, nowadays the music business is so weird that songwriters and publishers don't make any money unless you get on a movie or TV or something, because a lot of the population, 85% of the population want to listen free for everything, their new album and their favorite band and everything. So I don't really know how songwriters make money anymore, and other than getting on a commercial or a TV show. But it's the song, and that's what Firefall always had. And when you think about Dan Fogelberg or the Eagles or Little River Band or a lot of those great bands, it was the songs.
It was
songs first and foremost. Hey, and since I'm talking here and drinking my coffee, Um, cool story about Firefall. So I had the amazing fortune to fall into the touring band of Gram Parsons, Emmylou Harris, and the Fallen Angels.
Right.
And I wasn't the best guitar player that they could have had because I was not a country picker, you know.
Right,
And,
which is tough.
but
Yeah.
I was, they played their first gig in Boulder, Colorado. And I got a call from the manager of the club and said, get your ass down here. You might have a gig. And I went, with who? Gram Parsons. And I went, who?
What?
And he said, the Flying Burrito Brothers, that Byrds country album. And I went, oh, right. And I got hired because I was better than their other guy, but it's interesting because James Burton played all of the, Telecaster parts on the Graham's GP album, and he was Elvis's guitar player. And Elvis said, you can't go tour with anybody else. Right. So Graham and Emmylou thought, how about Clarence White? But Clarence was with the Byrds and he couldn't go out with him. So they hired this guy kind of sight unseen out in LA. And he was really nervous and didn't play very good. And I got the gig after sitting in with them and not being a country guy. But anyway, this is a roundabout story, but we played our first gig with Graham and Emmylou at the world famous Armadillo headquarters in Austin. The second gig we played was in Houston, Texas, at Liberty Hall. And we're playing, and all of a sudden, onto the stage walks Linda Ronstadt and Neil Young.
Oh, geez.
And I'm going, oh, now I had been 4 days before that painting apartments in my apartment building to pay rent, because I didn't have a gig and I was looking for a gig. And now I'm on stage with Neil and Linda going, oh my God. That was the first night that Emmylou and Linda Ronstadt ever met or sang together. And, it was great. And back in the dressing room after our show, Neil invited all of us back to his hotel suite for a big party. And so it was Neil Young's band, Linda Ronstadt's band, and Gram Parsons' band. I'll go to Neil's hotel suite and, doing mass quantities of everything and staying up till dawn. But immediately, as he was wont to do a lot, Gram Parsons grabbed one of Neil's guitars and started playing like 20 or 25 country songs, by the Louvin brothers and people that I'd never heard of, not being a country guy, but near Graham playing these songs, Linda Ronstadt and Emmylou Harris sat really close together, their faces about 6 inches apart, and blended their voices in harmonies for the very first time. And all of us watching, it was really magical. Beautiful. But all of us watching even knew it was historic. It's like, wow, to be there for that moment when, Linda Ronstadt, she had the best female pop vocal and had so many hits for so long in the 70s with Peter Asher producing her and everything. And Emmylou's voice, angelic and fragile, it was unbelievable. And one of the things where this is going to is the intertwining mesh of a lot of those Southern California groups. And when you think about how many bands Bernie Ledden was in, and hey, yeah. and Linda Ronstadt was, was Lowell George's girlfriend. And then she was, John David Souther girlfriend, and it was just all this, and so Rick Roberts, when he was in the Flying Burrito Brothers, had basically, after a burrito gig in DC, went to a club and discovered Emmylou Harris, and he calls Chris Hillman and Chris, you got to come down and hear this gal sing. She's amazing. And Chris goes, I'm in bed, you idiot. I don't want to get up and go take the cab. He got pissed, and Rick says, no, really, you got to come down here. And Chris took a cab down, and they discovered that night, in a national sense, Emmylou Harris. And within a few days, Chris Hillman was calling his buddy Gram Parsons out in LA saying, I think we might have found the girl you're looking for to sing with. And sure enough, and then a year later or 6 months later or something, they come to Boulder where I live, and Rick Roberts, and and it was like, oh, and I fell into the Fallen Angels, Gram and Amy Lou's band. Anyway, I met Rick Roberts. Here's where the long-winded story is going. I met Rick Roberts in New York City when he came to the club we were playing at, and he wanted to see Emmy Lou on stage with Gram. He wanted to see Gram, the guy who he replaced in the Flying Burrito Brothers. And that's where I met him. And during talking about, stuff, you live in Boulder? I live in Boulder. We should get together. And when we got back to Boulder, now Rick didn't think I was very good in that country rock, that country music setting, which I wasn't, but he happened to walk into a club where I was rocking in the rock band that I was playing with. And he said, that's the same guy. And he started talking to me and said, we should get together. And he ended up stealing me from that band. And I was going to be his guitar player on his third solo record that he was about to start making. Okay. So I thought, oh, this is great. Rick Roberts. All right. When Mark Andes started coming into our little jam sessions, it didn't feel like a solo record anymore of Rick's. It felt like a band.
Yeah.
And here's the end of the story. Rick said, I know this guy in Washington, D.C., Larry Burnett, who sings and writes great, and we sound great together. Do you want to hear a song? Mark and I go, sure. And the first song that Rick played for us on a reel-to-reel tape, of course, cassettes hadn't been invented then, the first song we heard of Larry's was Cinderella. And we just went, oh my, get him out here. And so the climax of this story is when Larry came out and we had a different drummer, Michael Clark was still a month away from joining our band. We started rehearsals for, we didn't have a name of the band. We didn't have any gigs yet, but we knew we had, a lot of stuff going. On our first week of practice, Bob, Firefall had 20 to 25 original songs to work out.
Wow.
All of Rick and Larry's, and Mark and I are just going, oh, what else you got? Amazing. And the thing about those songs were, a year and a half later, when we made our first album, a lot of those songs we learned in the first week, like Mexico, It Doesn't Matter, Living Ain't Living, Cinderella, ended up being on the record. And that's so amazing. And Firefall's first three records, which were just great songs and a great synergistic performance of the guys in the band, our first three albums, and you listen to those songs, they're great albums, they're great songs, and they still stand up today. But it's the songs, the songs are great. And, what other new band can you think of that gets together and has 25 songs to learn, original, and with us playing it, we didn't have to try to sound like anybody. We just sounded like us. So, like Firefall. And, when you're in a new band, I've been in plenty of new bands, you don't have any songs. You don't know what you're going to sound like. You don't know, what tomorrow's going to bring with your band. We had our sights set because we had Mark Andes from Spirit and JoJo Gunn. A month later, Michael Clark from the Byrds joined, who Rick had played with in the Burrito Brothers. Rick Roberts from the Burrito Brothers and all this stuff. They had their sights set high. They knew that we didn't want to just be a club band around Boulder, and to have that many songs, man, unbelievable.
What was it like going in the studio, though? You had everything prepared. I know a lot of artists work out things in the studio. They actually are doing the lyrics and, reworking them in the studio. So how long did it take to really do that debut album? Was it just a couple of weeks? Did it take a few months?
It took 1 month in Miami at Criteria Studios. And for instance, there were a lot of solos that I was going to play that I hadn't played yet, that I didn't know what I was going to play. Now, a quick little story about how great the whole Firefall, our history and some of the stuff we did was just amazing. So we couldn't go up the hill to Caribou Ranch in above Boulder in Nederland, Colorado, because at that time they only had a 24-hour lockout day that was $3,000 a day. We went, God, we'll go through our budget in the first week or two. It's like, God, geez. So we flew everybody to Criteria. And when we went in there as an unknown band, now people knew who Michael Clark was or Mark Andes or whatever, but Firefall, nobody had ever heard of yet. And, the Bee Gees were recording down the hall and Stephen Stills was down the hall. Yeah. When it came time for me to do my solo on Mexico, which I knew in my brain was the song that I would really be able to, as a lead guitar player, shine on. People were in and out of the control room. I was out there warming up. And I mean, I'd played Mexico for a year and a half leading up to us recording it. So I kind of knew what I was going to play. But, in terms of figuring out all the licks and solos and stuff, I didn't know. I was just going to wing it. And the producer pushed the button, said, "You ready to go?" And I went, "Yeah." So I started playing. It's going good. I'm answering back Rick's vocal. I'm playing. My amp sounds great. I'm playing really good that morning, and everything. The day before, we had added the mariachi horn section to Mexico, da 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 da, in the middle of my solo, which I'd never played with before. So I'm thinking, I don't know where they come or what I'm going to play, So I'm playing my solo. It's going good. And then all of a sudden, there's the horns. And I stop and they play and I play and they play and I play. And then I finish the solo and the performance off and the song's over 3.5 minutes later. And the one take performance. And the producer, Jim Mason, pushed the button and said, "That was fantastic. Come on in." And I went, "Jim, I had no idea what I was going to do when the horns played in the middle of my solo. Let me see if I can beat what I did, just that section. Let me have another pass at that section of the solo." And he said, "No." And I went, "No, let me see if I can beat that." He said, it'll take, 30 seconds. And he said, "No." And I went, "No." I take off my guitar. I'm a little ticked off. I walk in the studio and the first person I see is my guitar hero, Eric Clapton, who's been watching me play.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And the only thing I'll say was it's a good thing I didn't know he was there before I started playing, because I wouldn't have been able to play anything, but, wow. And he, I kind of turned into Jackie Gleason, and,
sure.
And he stood up, and he was, the guitar hero for, millions of American guitar players. He stood up, I stood up, and he shook my hand and said, "Keen playing, man." And he walked out, and it was an amazing thing. But it just goes to show when, now all the lyrics, for instance, to answer your question, we had the songs, Rick and Larry had the songs finished. There were a cute couple of times where we'd cut out 2 measures before we got to the chorus, or, little arrangement things. But back in those days when you were spending $100 an hour, for the studio or whatever the studio might be, you couldn't write lyrics on there because suddenly your budget just starts going down. Firefall had all the songs ready. We had the players and we were ready to go. And for me, the cool thing was that spontaneously I would play on a lot of those songs, not knowing what exactly I was going to play. Like on "You Are the Woman," that Jim said, "Okay, time for the guitar solo." And I'm going, "Okay." And I had my guitar sound and I didn't really know where I was going to start or where I was going to go with it. And it took me a couple of beginnings to go, okay, I'll start here, and then probably on about the 3rd or 4th take, I just played it, and I really had no idea how it was going to end or whatever. It just played. And it's a good thing I like that solo, because that's the solo I have to play every night.
Hey, you got to play that one.
I got to play that one every night. And I remember one time about 10, 15 years ago, I kind of thought, I'm going to play something different tonight on You Are the Woman. I mean, heck, it's D, G, and A. I can play all day on D, G, and A. So I played a different solo, and right away the crowd was like, that's not it. You know, it's like there's certain things that have to be the same every night.
Yeah, what was it like? You know, getting there in the top 40. It's like hearing that on the radio for the terrestrial radio back then. The first
Terrestrial
time.
radio.
Yeah, yeah. The first time you heard that, what was like, you know, you're in the car or something like that. It's just got to be
Right.
surreal, especially back then.
It was. And I had years earlier, I had replaced Tommy Bolin in this Boulder band Zephyr. And I remember hearing myself play off of that Zephyr album, Sunset Ride, you know, driving around Boulder, Denver, and had to pull over and go, oh, that's me. You know, it just seemed really natural with Firefall. Because we, like I said, we had our sights set on the big time with these great songs from the get-go. And, you know, but to actually hear yourself on radio or, you know, start doing radio interviews, and they wanted to know about how, you know, just, you know, 40 years ago, just like what we're doing today, except not on Zoom. It was fantastic, but it really felt like it was supposed to be,
Yeah,
you
you
know,
worked hard.
and
Yeah.
yeah. And this Friends and Family album that is just now out, it kind of came from that, because our first album went gold so quick and got so much airplay, and back on terrestrial radio, it was either AM radio, which was all the poppy stuff like You Are the Woman for us, or on our second album, Just Remember I Love You. But it was FM too, and we got a lot of FM airplay with Mexico and Cinderella, etc. So we had kind of the best of both worlds, and we toured right out of the gate with Fleetwood Mac during the White Album. Excuse me.
Yeah, yeah. And they were on the
Doobie
Rumors
Brothers
tour. Yeah.
Hey, we did the last band tour, and
Wow.
I still kick myself for 45 years ago not having a little Instamatic camera to take pictures of. I mean, the band playing on stage, or Leonard Skinner. I mean, and I had an all access pass. So I'm going, hey, I could have gone right there and taken all those pictures. But after Firefall would play our opening act set, every night I would go and behind the curtain sit about 10 feet away from Lee Von Helm playing drums and singing. And there's Garth Hudson, the only remaining member of the band that's alive still. And he'd be doing his magic back there. And sometimes on that last band tour, they had the 5-piece Civil War horn section play with them. And I mean, the band was, you know, arguably the best American band ever. I mean, that album, their first two albums came out and changed everything. I'm sure you remember. It was like, wow.
Anyway. Yeah, it's incredible. They got on my radar when the Scorsese film came. I was a kid.
Oh,
I mean,
oh yeah, you young guy.
It's my childhood, definitely. It's like it's amazing, and then know that you opened up for Fleetwood Mac on the Rumors tour, and then you got to really Mick got involved with some of your projects too. It's just
right.
The stories are incredible.
They are, and I, looking back, I just know how lucky and fortunate I was. Deserving too, as a guitar player, I was deserving to be in a band that had platinum records. But it took me 10 or 20 years to realize that. It's like, but the stories and what Firefall and myself got to experience touring with all those bands in the 70s, unbelievable. I mean, the biggest crowd we ever played in front of was a 3-day festival out in the plains near Austin, Texas. And there was 125 or 130,000 people there. And I think we played the day we played, I think it was the Doobie Brothers, the band, Steve Miller, a whole lot of other acts, in Firefall, like fifth on that day. And I think we played like at 11 a.m. And I'm looking over 130,000 people going, wow, you know, very fulfilling and just amazing. So I know how lucky I am. And the great thing about it, when you strip everything away, is that really good music means so much to people who don't play music, you
Yes,
know.
yes.
And when we do meet and greets, and people come up and said, my wife and I got married to Just Remember I Love You 30 years ago, or I had a really serious illness and your song blank really got me through it. It's humbling, because music is the universal language of the spheres. It's like, to make music and be of a time in the 70s, where some of the best music was being made at that time. Really unbelievable. I can see my light there is not probably
Yeah,
helping my picture.
we're good.
Anyway,
Yeah, I can see
that's
it.
where this Friends and Family album came from. The idea was, let's honor the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, it seems like such a community. It's all intertwined. And it's a perfect title for that too. And you're also including a Poco song in there. Timothy B. Schmidt, who was a member of that band, did backing vocals. And just remember, I mean, it's just like it's everything just ties together. And it's really heartwarming to see that, and to see how you are knitting that together. And you do a Fleetwood Mac cover on this album too. And that's an
Right,
interesting choice as well. World Turning. Gosh, I love that Fleetwood Mac, especially their early years. World Turning
right.
is I just love that track.
That was interesting. Again, now a lot of this record was kind of done by email. And on World Turning, once we picked that song, I wanted to really study the great Lindsey Buckingham's guitar parts on that. And there's like three or four acoustic guitars playing that riff before his electric guitar comes in and plays the solo. And I cut that. I cut all those guitars, the acoustic guitars and one or two electric rhythm guitars, to a click track and tambourines. So I had all that, and then I sent it off to John. And I'll tell you what, John Bisaha, when his vocals come in, it's kind of mouth dropping. It's just like, oh, this guy can sing.
Oh yeah.
And again, it goes back to, I knew that each one of these songs needed to be as great as we could make them, even if they were a bit different, because these were some of the best songs of the 70s. And the Poco song, for instance, I didn't really know which Poco song to do either. And, the consensus was, let's do In the Heart of the Night by Paul Cotton. And, in the 20 years, leading up to that, in the 90s and 2000s and 2010s, we used to tour with Poco all the time. Our manager in Nashville managed Poco, Firefall, and Pure Prairie League. So we did a lot of shows with them, and got to know Rusty Young and Paul Cotton really good. And when it came time to start thinking about what I was going to do on In the Heart of the Night, I'm a really good slide guitar player. And of course, Firefall doesn't have a pedal steel player, and Rusty's pedal steel's all over the original. I just figured, there's a sax. I'll play slide and we'll get Jim on sax, and we'll kind of make our own version of this. And Steven Weinmeister, who sings this song, loves this song and has known it and sung it for decades. So it was a labor of love, and it was great. I'd like to insert here too that a year and a half ago, there were 3 original members in Firefall. And the late, great David Muse, unfortunately, died about a year or so ago. And I really wanted to get him on this record, and he just was too ill. And Jim Waddell here in Denver, great sax, flute, keyboard player, just amazing. He's been in the band for 3 or 4 years as David's physical decline went downhill. And as you know, we dedicated this album to David Muse, who also played with Marshall Tucker, and great player. And for me as the lead guitar player to have somebody of that caliber, or now Jim Waddell's caliber, to trade licks with on a solo with flute or sax and lead guitar is just a joy. And then the other fellow, of course, Mark Andes, he got sick of touring. He's a couple years older than me and just said, I'm done. I don't want to be in a band anymore. And so he retired like 2 or 3 months before we were supposed to start this record, and, the cards lined up, and our karma must have been great because we got John Basaha, who also plays with the Babies, but the Babies only play like 5 or 6 gigs a year. So it was like he was ready. And he and Steven, like I've said a number of times, they just sang so great on this record.
They sound fantastic. You got some really passionate vocals on this entire project, and the Lynyrd Skynyrd cover, "Simple Man," that really stood out to me as far as like you're talking about major vocals there.
Right, and that's John Basaha, the great singer. We've had great singers in Firefall, and two of the best were the guys who wrote most of the songs, Rick Roberts and Larry Burnett, back in the 70s. But I've never had a lead singer in Firefall, an LA rock guy who can go and just get out there and do his rock star thing and have the vocals to back it up. I mean, oh my God. And, Simple Man, we kept that really pretty close to the original, although as soon as I started recording the rhythm guitar parts on that song, I kind of thought, I wanted my friend John Magny, who plays accordion from the Subdudes, to play accordion on this, because accordion shouldn't be on every song, but the accordion on a tune that is right really puts it in the back porch, or just really puts it down home, Americana kind of feel. And I knew that I wanted accordion on our version of Simple Man. Yeah. I really like that. And when I didn't really listen to the original too much because I was really familiar with the song, but Lynyrd Skynyrd had 3 of the best lead guitar players going in the 70s. And I knew that my solo needed to really smoke and, to the best of my ability, honor those guys in Lynyrd Skynyrd.
Yeah, I remember meeting Ed King. I did a story many, many years ago, and he was actually like teaching people. It was like one of those rock and roll fantasy camps.
Right.
And just completely so talented and so into it. Just a really wonderful artist. I really, and very well missed as well, as sure as David Muse. Cancer sucks. It's just
cancer
awful.
sucks. And, I was hoping that we'd finish Simple Man, so that my friend Dallas Shue, who's the guitar tech to the Stars and has been with U2 for like 35 years and makes records with Paul McCartney and Peter Gabriel and just all the top guy in the business. He was good friends with Gary Rossington, who recently passed away. And he was saying, "Can I play this for Gary?" And I said, it's not really finished yet. And we didn't have John on the vocal yet. And I went, definitely with a scratch vocal on there, not yet. Let me finish it a little bit, and then you can play it for Gary. And unfortunately, Gary Rossington died too. And I did put on our liner notes on this album, I wanted to acknowledge some, if not most, of the people who had died recently. David Crosby, Gary Rossington, Christine McVie. Oh my God.
Gosh, yeah.
Early Fleetwood Mac with Stevie and Christine. Oh, and Lindsay. Oh my God. What a band.
Sang so well, especially the early Fleetwood Mac. Christine, she was amazing. Gosh,
she was amazing.
Listen to that stuff.
And it was just a shame. And we used to play. I only met Jeff Beck once for about 5 seconds. But we used to play gigs with the Doobie Brothers, Jeff Beck, somebody else in Firefall, back in the day and everything. It's amazing how many rock stars of the 70s are passing away. And, You know, it sucks being in your 70s, but I know how lucky I am to still be doing this. And this album, and you know what? I have I have a scoop for you, Robert.
Oh, yeah. You could definitely use that here.
The scoop is we're already starting Friends and Family too.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, it
And
makes
you know,
sense.
this idea is way bigger than Firefall. And there were so many songs and artists that we kind of left out of these 13. You know, for instance, we had played So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star by the Byrds as an encore song for years, you know, and that was one of the songs we had cut. And then I kind of thought going in, you know, this album doesn't need to be 14 or 15 songs. And we already have a Byrds song, you know, I Feel a Whole Lot Better, Gene Clark song. And, you know, we'll hold back Rock and Roll Star. So we're already 3 or 4 songs in to making the next record, which will come out sometime in 2024. But it's such a great concept. And, you know, we're doing a Stephen Stills song. And frankly, we're doing another Fleetwood Mac song. And
Excellent.
and some other songs. And we're trying to pick the right Beach Boys song to do, which it's like, wow, the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson. And
Yeah.
I knew Carl Wilson pretty good, who lived in the mountains above Boulder. One thing that's pretty interesting was a lot of people don't know that all the migration to Southern California, you know, Stephen Stills and Richie Furay and Jim McGuinn, you know, basically from New York City, moved to L.A. Joni Mitchell and Neil Young came from Canada. From Florida came Bernie Ledden, and a little bit later Don Felder. From
Mm,
Texas came, you know, Don Henley. From Detroit came Glenn Frey. They all moved to L.A. because that was the new place to go, you know, and they invented folk rock, the Byrds, country rock, you know, which you know, the early Buffalo Springfield and even Gram Parsons when he joined the Byrds to do Sweetheart of the Rodeo, which was a commercial flop. You know, after how
yeah.
big the Byrds were, they put out that country stuff and people went, "What?" You know,
What the-
what people don't realize was after all those Southern California rock stars became rock stars, and Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and Eagles, and Baba, you know, it was great. Many of them got sick of living in LA and moved to the mountains above Boulder, Colorado, where I was from. You know, Stephen Stills, Chris Hillman, Richie Furay, Joe Walsh, Dan Fogelberg, Carl Wilson of the Beach Boys, Mark Andes from Spirit. You know, Boulder for about 4 or 5 years became a center of national and international music, kind of like Seattle would be 10 years
Right,
later with the grunge stuff, or Austin,
right.
Texas would be later. But Boulder was really it for a while. And when Firefall was forming and we were playing at a place called the Good Earth, a little club at the Good Earth, and, you know, people knew, oh, God, the guy from the Byrds, and, oh, you know, the guy from Spirit. Oh, okay, let's go hear this new band, Firefall. On any given night, we'd be up there playing, and Stephen Stills would walk in, or Dan Fogelberg would walk in and say, "Hey, can I sit in?" And we'd go, "Come on up," you know, or Chris Hillman or Joe Walsh, or, you know, it's like, you know, I got to know Joe a little bit when they were making Rocky Mountain Way up at Caribou,
Uh,
you know, with Barnstorm, you know, so and Firefall was a direct descendant from all those Southern California folk rock and country rock people who moved to Boulder, and we became kind of the top of that genealogy tree. Which to me, that genealogy tree, which starts with the Byrds and the Buffalo Springfield, and has, you know, the Eagles, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Poco, Gram Parsons, blah 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 blah, and Firefall's at the top of that tree of lineage. When you think about Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, who
oh yeah.
borrowed heavily from the Byrds and the 12 string too, that's another tree. He's not really in our Southern California Boulder tree. Tom Petty's in a tree almost by himself with from Florida. And just like I say, to have played a small role in the 70s when the music was so great and the record labels then allowed you to be who you were and do the songs you did and wrote and sang, you know. And shortly thereafter, in the late 70s or early 80s, the record companies kind of got a stranglehold on a lot of bands, and no, you can't do that. We need you to do these songs, or we want you to sound more like this, or whatever, you know. And then, of course, then disco happened and grunge and everything, and music is always changing. But boy, the music of the late 60s and early 70s, you know, man, can't beat it.
Yeah, they let you do what you want. You had that artistic freedom. You were on Atlantic Records. So was that Ahmet who was
Ahmet
running?
Ertegun.
Yeah, yeah. They let you do,
I
yeah.
mean, when you think about it, Ahmet Ertegun and his producer Tom Dowd, you know, they did Led Zeppelin, Aretha Franklin, the Rolling Stones. You know, they had amazing acts on their label. And when they heard us and heard our demo tape that Chris Hillman produced in Boulder, they gobbled us right up, and kind of out of the box, they heard some of these songs and said, "Oh boy!" And they put our album out, and it went gold in less than 3 months, which still to this day I marvel at the fact that I've been told by a lot of people, including people who worked for Atlantic Records, yeah, your album, Firefall's first album in '76, went gold quicker than any other artist on Atlantic. And I went, Led Zeppelin and the Stones? It's like, you got to be kidding. But it's like, we had such great success right away. And it was the songs, the sound of the band, yes, which was, you know, once it came out, they didn't know how to, you know, it wasn't really country rock, and people kind of called it the Colorado sound, but it was all the songs that featured, and, you know, Rick and Larry singing, you know, how great was that?
Oh, beautiful voices, and such a soundtrack to so many of our lives here. And I always want to say thank you for creating this and giving us so many memories. And it's got to be great. So you were hitting the road through just indefinitely. There's no farewell tour or anything. You guys, sounds like you're going all these farewell tours we're paying a fortune for these days. Eagles have been saying
Right.
farewell for like 2 decades
Well, we got a
now.
new album out. We got one coming out next year too. And, you know, we're pretty much weekend warriors now. We don't go on tour. We go out and play a gig. We fly out and play a gig, or we
One
fly out and
off.
play two gigs and fly home. So it's not the grind that it used to be. Man, I'll tell you, back in the '70s, I could, you know, at my apartment or my house, I couldn't have a dog or a cat or plants. We'd be gone for a month and a half.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
6 nights a week we'd be playing. And it was great because we'd be playing stadium shows, or we'd be opening for Fleetwood Mac Rumors or whatever. And, you know, but I was hardly ever home, you know, and it's, you know, traveling now sucks, you know, taking airplanes and dealing with airports after the pandemic, and now airlines, you know, you never know when, you know, a certain airline is going to cancel 1,000 flights every day.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, so, you know, being on the road now is not the greatest, but hey, we get to play for that hour or 75 minutes that we're on stage. So I know how fortunate I am to still be doing this. And what keeps me going is that our music made so many people, was such a big deal in so many people's lives, you know. Lucky us.
Yep, timing was perfect for you as well. Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for stopping by. I really, really appreciate it, and
Thanks
best
for having
wishes.
me, and thanks for playing our record and pushing it. We're really happy and proud of this Friends and Family Firefall album. So thank you very much, Robert.
Have a good one. Take
Thank you.
care.
We'll be talking again.
Take care. Bye bye. And I really hope you enjoyed that. I really love Firefall, and I was telling him this. They are the soundtrack of a lot of people's lives. Just it's not a household name. I love the logo. If you check out their website, I've even included it in my promo posters here. Really cool logo. But I love talking with these guys from the 70s, which kind of sounds odd to say, hey, these people from the 70s, like as if they're like in some closet and you pull them out of the 1970s. He's very much up to date, and they put on a great show. Like we said, they don't tour like they really used to, but they're out there, and if you can catch them, I really highly recommend them. Firefall. Thanks for joining me, and I really want to thank Jock for showing up here on the corners and speaking with me about the project. Friends and family, get it wherever you get your music. It's on all those streaming services. Until next time, have a good one. Stay safe, and we'll see and hear from you all soon.